After the flood, God said to Noah, "As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease." Genesis 8:22. In late January 2009, 14 ELCA Lutherans from 9 different states journeyed to Nicaragua for a 10-day study trip. Our mission was to learn as much as we could in the allotted 10 days about climate change, hunger, and poverty. In this group were photographers, videographers, advocates, seminary graduates, ELCA staff, young people, not so young people, women, and men. What we really had in common was a love of Jesus and a sense of a calling to care for God's creation and our neighbor. Our encounter was at once both wonderful and terrible. Wonderful was the courage, determination, intelligence, and warmth of God's people in Nicaragua. But terrible was the predicament of many Nicaraguan people who live in precarious vulnerability to the devastating and ever more present impacts of climate change.
Estamos trabajando con el cambio climático. ¿Por qué? Porque nosotros sabemos que a través de la historia son los pobres los que más sufren. Y nosotros lo empezamos a observar en nuestras comunidades, cómo los cambios climáticos están trayendo sequía un año y en el siguiente año o tal vez 2 años más trae inundaciones. Entonces no hay una estabilidad como antes, que podíamos decir ahora toca invierno, ahora es verano, ahora llueve en cualquier momento y no llueve cuando corresponde llover. Para eso es que nosotros nos estamos preparando.
As long as the earth endures. Most of us probably feel pretty confident that the earth that God created and found good will endure beyond our lifespan. We understand that there is seed time and harvest, and those of us who live close to the land live in that rhythm. Cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night rule our lives, and most of us can't imagine that these constants in our lives will ever change. God says that they shall not cease. But what if they dramatically changed? What if seed time and harvest came at different times than we know? What if summer's heat and the spring's rains began to come with a new kind of violent intensity? How would we adapt to this new reality? What does it mean to us and to our neighbors? The disruption of seasonal rhythms and the intensifying of droughts and floods are changes that scientists warn us to expect as the global climate warms. But these changes are already happening in many places around the world, and in Nicaragua, as in many developing countries, poor communities are being hit hardest by the changing climate.
El problema de mi comunidad pues es el asunto de los fenómenos naturales que nos afectan. Si no es de una forma, es de otra forma.
No es estable, el invierno aquí en nuestra zona no es estable, no es un invierno que digamos son 6 meses y los 6 meses va a llover. Ya le había dicho más antes de que lo que puede llover en 3 meses se viene y cae al menos en unos 5 días, unos 7 días. En ese periodo de siembra cae poca agua, cae poca lluvia y el siembro en muchas ocasiones lo perdemos.
Hemos sido bastante afectados en ese aspecto por los fenómenos que han habido desde que empezó el huracán Mitch.
Though unaware of the global dimensions of climate change, the rural farmers we met described with perplexity and dismay the clear and troubling changes they've observed in seasons, rainfall patterns, and storm systems. Too much rain or not enough, unpredictable seasons that disrupt the crop cycle and with it their livelihoods. In addition to changes in seasonal patterns, scientists predict that a warming climate will increase the number and intensity of hurricanes and other major storms. In 2007, Hurricane Felix, a Category 5 storm, hit Nicaragua's poorest region, the North Atlantic coast. The destruction to buildings, crops, forest, and infrastructure was immense.
nosotros somos una etnia o una raza que somos muy pobres, muy humildes. Y cuando nosotros fuimos afectados por el huracán, que incluso a la vista se puede ver cómo ha destruido esta es la iglesia morava.
When we visited, 16 months after Hurricane Felix, communities were still struggling to recover from this major setback, to feed their families and to rebuild their homes and communities. If our future holds more storms like Felix, it is poor communities like those on Nicaragua's Atlantic coast that are most vulnerable and least able to recover easily, if at all. Adverse changes in climate, combined with systems of global trade and localized environmental degradation, perpetuate and exacerbate the existing cycles of poverty and contribute to regional food insecurity.
Regresando un poquito a lo del cambio climático, puedo decir que ha cambiado bastante. Por ejemplo, la parte más alta de Villanueva era una parte más montañosa. Es una parte con bastante agua superficial que corría, muchas que nosotros le llamamos quebradas o criques, ¿verdad? Y allí había también pescado, no solo en el río. Entonces era como una oportunidad también para alimentación. Pero en los años que son muy secos, esta posibilidad o esta oportunidad de alimento, por ejemplo de pescado, se reduce. Porque ya ahora los criques están muy sedimentados, ¿verdad? Porque las grandes lluvias han traído todo el suelo, lo han lavado y lo han depositado en las fuentes de agua superficiales y ahora apenas son pequeñas corrientes que se mantienen y que en verano totalmente desaparecen. Y no era antes así. En la parte donde había mucha montaña y mucho árbol, que las quebradas no se secaban.
Climate change contributes to the deterioration of natural resources and also disrupts the crop cycle. Low yields and crop losses due to unpredictable seasons and severe storms discourage farmers from continuing to cultivate their land, exacerbate food insecurity, and worsen trends of migration and landlessness.
A veces hay mucha lluvia y como los terrenos son muy escarpados en una parte de las comunidades, principalmente por ejemplo Las Vegas, entonces la gente con toda su cultura de quemar, de sembrar a favor de la pendiente, de sembrar cultivos limpios sin otro asocio, entonces todo eso se suma al factor de mucha precipitación o de cambio de variabilidad del tiempo o del clima, ¿verdad? Entonces eso provoca, ¿verdad?, que la gente, aunque sí ellos dicen seguimos sembrando, poco a poco vienen dejando de cultivar la tierra por las pérdidas que año con año vienen trayendo. Pero eso provoca, por ejemplo, mayor migración, tanto de hombres como de mujeres, y esto provoca que los niños y las niñas salgan a pedir a la calle, que no sé si ustedes lograron ver en la carretera, son muchos los niños y mujeres chineando que salen a pedir y mi gente, mi pueblo, muchas veces se ha convertido en mendigos.
Agricultural people who are eventually forced to disengage the land and leave in search of other sources of income not only become a part of the force that diminishes regional food security, but also themselves succumb to a certain poverty of the spirit.
Pero cuando dejamos que la desesperanza nos derrote totalmente, ¿verdad? Y que la pobreza, la crisis llegue a nuestra vida y no nos permita seguir adelante, entonces es cuando vamos a ver esa gente pidiendo.
Our trip is complete, but our journey has only just begun. Nicaraguans are some of millions of people around the world who are suffering because of global climate change. Similar stories can be heard in Africa, in Asia, on small islands in the Pacific, in indigenous communities in the Arctic. There is much work to do in healing this broken world, and we hope that you, like us, are moved to do God's work, to become God's hands in bringing hope and healing to the marginalized in Nicaragua and elsewhere. The Earth's climate is changing, and the people who live closest to the land suffer first and most profoundly. The poorest suffer because they have no recourse. They cannot easily move, nor do they have the resources to carry them through disasters. Poverty itself is a prolonged state of disaster. Who will hear the cries of the poor? Who will work with them so that they can live, raise their children, and have a brighter future? People of faith should heed the call of our neighbors and the cry of all creation. We must hear their stories, be present with them in their suffering, and advocate for justice.
Tengo la convicción de que los cristianos en general debemos siempre estar donde haya un humano que sufre. Con esa convicción es que la Iglesia Luterana en Nicaragua ha optado por trabajar principalmente con los más pobres.
We'll go home with images of those who are not so well fed. Images that will never leave us. And we cannot help but walk the road with them as advocates for what they are facing and what we will eventually face.
Our elected representatives listen to their constituents, and the people here with whom we have spent the last few days, people that we visited in communities, those are people who are much more directly affected by what we do or don't do in Washington than we can imagine. And their voices are not heard and will not be heard unless we raise our voices on their behalf.
After the flood, God said to Noah, "As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease." Genesis 8:22.